I will continue with our read aloud. In the morning, it seemed to me I must have been dreaming. The sun shone through the curtains onto the quilt that Grandma had made for me, creamy white with a sprinkling of deep blue stars. The smell of apples and crisp fall leaves was in the air. Next to me, Lavinia still slept peacefully, looking as if she had not stirred all night long. From downstairs, I could hear my baby sister, Cynthia, laughing. Stretching, I looked up at a tiny black spider spinning a web in the chink between logs in the corner. All that talk about Indians and snowstorms couldn't be real, I thought. This was real. Our snug log house, the barn out back where Father had his pottery wheel, Mother's flower garden, and Grandma with her smiles and hugs just down the road. There could be no better place to live than this. The spider, busy at its work, reminded me that it was time for our morning chores. Lavina, I touched her with my bare foot, and immediately her brown eyes fluttered open. It always amazed me how my sister could go from a sound sleep to wide awake in an instant, and she awoke every morning with a smile. Maybe, if we finish our chores early, Mother will have time to work on our dresses, I told her. Mother was sewing new Sunday dresses for us out of the soft wool she spun and wove herself. Oh, do you think so? Lavina beamed, and we both jumped quickly out of bed. Saturday mornings were always a busy time. Mother insisted that the cabin be just so for the Sabbath. A few hours later, we were nearly finished with all of the cleaning and the scouring and the churning and the baking. Mother was just crimping the crust of an apple pie while Lavina watched the baby. I had only to take out the ashes swept up from the hearth, and I would be free for a little while. Stepping out the back door, I emptied the ashes into the ash hopper. We saved them for making lye, which Mother used in cooking up her homemade soap. The air was so warm for October, and the sun was shining so bright it made me feel like singing. One of the hymns I often heard at the meeting house on Sundays popped into my mind. "Enter into my jaw," I sang at the top of my voice, "and sit down on my throat." Behind me, I heard muffled laughter. I whirled around and saw John Ragsdale, the 15-year-old boy who did chores for Father, watching me from the woodpile. "I think you've got your words mixed up a little," he said. He set down his axe and flashed me a teasing grin. "Don't you know it's enter into my joy and sit down on my throne?" John was an odd-looking boy, I thought, with his 2 long arms and legs, like a knobby-kneed colt, and sandy hair that refused to lie flat on his head, and a voice that alternately squeaked and croaked. Sounds like puberty. He was always teasing me. When he looked at me with his wide eyes and crooked grin, I could feel my face start to turn pink. It was doing it now. "Of course I knew it," I retorted. Turning my back on him, I hurried down the path to the barn. The barn was a world of its own, peaceful and apart. I loved its rich, earthy smells, the rustlings that might be mice up in the hayloft, the stamping and shifting sounds of animals in their stalls. The minute I walked through the door, I felt safe and warm. I liked to go there after my chores were done, just to be close to the animals and to Father. Though the barn was quite large, with many stalls, we kept only 3 horses and about a dozen cows. That was because farming was not Father's real work. Pottery was. I made my way down the row of stalls, stopping to give Daisy a pat. Lavina and I named her. She was our favorite cow, a sweet-faced little 2-year-old heifer, the color of honey, who loved to be petted. "Hello, Daisy." I reached my hand through the rails to her. She looked up at me with soft brown eyes, then licked my hand all over with her rough pink tongue. Attached to the far end of the barn was the shed where Father worked at his pottery. It smelled of damp clay and straw. I stopped in the doorway, knowing I must be careful not to disturb Father if he was at the wheel. He was. Shoulders hunched, eyes down, so he didn't notice me. He was focusing all of his attention on the lump of clay between his fingers. Father was not a tall man, but he always looked large to me when he was at the pottery wheel. I had seen this so many times, ever since I was a tiny, toddling child with Grandma holding me firmly by the hand. Yet each time it seemed new and miraculous. The great chunk of reddish clay, the turning wheel, Father's fingers so sure and strong. Round and round spun the wheel, the clay rising, growing, changing shape until that moment when suddenly, magically, it became a jug or a milk crock or a bowl. Here's a picture of the dad at the pottery wheel. The moment came again. A pinch, a quick wipe of a finger, and it was finished. A pitcher this time, slender and graceful. The wheel paused. Father looked up and smiled, and I went to sit in the straw beside him. I knew better than to talk to him even now as he broke off a small piece of clay and began rolling it between his hands, fashioning a handle. Instead, I studied the other pitchers and jugs lined up to dry on a nearby bench. On each one, at the place where the bottom of the handle joined the vessel, I could see the clear print of Father's thumb. Looking at this thumbprint made me feel good inside. It was as if each piece of pottery he had made had his picture etched into it. No matter who bought the piece or where it went, it would always somehow still be his. The handle was smooth now, and just the right length. Working quickly, Father attached it to the top, then curled it around and pressed the end firmly into the side of the pitcher. There was his thumbprint again, as plain as could be. I couldn't help smiling. Father smiled back, but in his gentle blue-gray eyes I could read a question. I could never keep my thoughts secret from Father for long. His eyes had a way of looking right inside my head. Without knowing I was going to say it, I suddenly blurted out, "Are we really going to Oregon?" For a moment, he didn't answer, just kept smoothing the curve of the handle with the wet finger. Then his eyes met mine. "I am thinking about it, Mary Ellen," he said quietly. It was impossible to put into words the jumble of fears and regrets that swirled around inside my head. Indians and snowstorms, school, poetry, Grandma. All I could think of to say was, "But why? I like living in Arkansas. There is no ague fever here." "No," Father agreed. "There is no ague here. But times are hard right now, and people are poor. They have no money even to buy one of my pitchers. Out in Oregon, the land is rich and the farming is easy. I have heard from people who have been there and seen it with their own eyes. The government is giving away this rich land to anyone who will settle it." I could tell from the far-off look in his eyes that Father was remembering the man who had spoken in town, the one who joked about pigs with knives and forks sticking into them. Then his face turned sober. "I know," he said, "that the journey would be long and difficult. It's more than 2,000 miles across rivers and deserts and high mountains. But many others are going. We would not be alone, and there are guidebooks now to show the way. I think that with careful preparations, it could be done safely." Was his mind made up then? It almost seemed so to me. Father's hand, rough and covered with powdery clay dust, reached out and gently brushed back the hair from my face. "Don't worry so, Mary Ellen," he said, smiling. "Nothing has been decided yet. I must consider carefully, and Mother and I need to talk some more. But everything will be all right. You'll see." I nodded. As always, when Father smiled at me, it seemed as if the whole world would be right. I'm going to stop there. I did want to show you real quick that you could start putting the characters on here. So I have Mary Ellen, I have Lavina, and I have Mom and Dad, and Cynthia, who's the baby sister, and then Grandma. And then I also added John on there too. He's a 15-year-old who helps them out. So I will see you next time.